So a little while ago, I had a 24 party and I invited some people, and those people invited some people, and before you know it, I've got a massive guest list to manage. So, what's the obvious solution? Well, code, of course. We're programmers, we have all the codes. So, I thought, what if I could write a script that asks the guests for their name and checks against a guest list to see whether or not they should be admitted? Now, the actual implementation was done via Alexa, which is a little bit hairy, but let's see if we can make a basic version of this using JavaScript. Now, using what we know about JavaScript so far, we could write maybe like a gigantic conditional statement. Say, if guest name equals Angela, then alert welcome. Else, if guest name equals Jack, then alert welcome. And so on and so forth until I basically break my fingers or I run out of motivation. So the problem here is that we've seen that you can store data in variables, but we've only been able to store a single piece of data. So for example, var a equals Angela, and we've seen that you can store different data types. But how can we store a collection of related items into the same container or the same variable? Well, this is a case for creating an array. So let's say that we have a single piece of data, an egg in this case. Instead of storing a single egg into a variable, we can also store it inside an array, or say an egg box full of eggs. And this is essentially what an array is. It's a collection of items that are related, and they can be stored together into the same container or the same variable. And this is what the syntax looks like. So you would create a variable, give it a name, let's say call it eggs, and we can set it to equal a bunch of data and enclose it inside these square brackets with commas in between each piece of data. And if we try to retrieve a piece of data from this array, then we can simply use the name of the array, eggs, and specify the position of the data inside the array by using, again, square brackets. Now, just take a quick guess. Which egg do you think my egg will equal if I run these lines of code? Given that the position that I'm trying to tap into is the egg at position 1 inside the eggs array. So if you remember from before, we said that computers always start counting from 0. So us programmers, we also always start counting from 0. So the first egg in the array is in fact at position 0. And that means that the second egg is in fact the one at position 1, which is a little bit weird. But this is the egg that we would get and we would store inside that variable my egg if we ran the code that said var my egg equals eggs square brackets 1. Now we can do other things with arrays as well. We can say eggs.length, and this counts the eggs inside the eggs array and gives us the number 5 back because there are 5 items inside the array. So using arrays, we can create a very simple guest list. So we can say something like, for example, var guest list equals open and close square brackets. And it's really important to remember that whenever you see square brackets, then it's usually something to do with a collection data type, such as an array. And we use these square brackets when we're creating arrays, as well as when we're trying to retrieve items from arrays. So this is a telltale sign that we're dealing with something that holds a number of data items, such as an array. So inside our guest list, I'm going to add all of these names that are on the guest list. So let's turn these names into strings. And now I can add them one by one into the guest list, remembering to add a comma in between each piece of data. So here's our brand new array that is stored inside a variable called guest list. And this array contains all the names of the people who are on my guest list. So you can see that if I use console.log and I try to print what's inside my variable guest list, then it will print out all of the items inside my array like so. And it will also tell me that there's 6 items inside this array. Now we can also find this out by simply saying guest list dot length. And this will do exactly the same thing. It will count how many pieces of data are currently inside the guest list and give you an output of that number. Now, let's see if we can retrieve the first guest on that guest list. So remember, when we want to retrieve items from the array, we have to start counting from 0. And we retrieve items in the same way that we create items, using the square brackets. And inside the square brackets, we specify the position of the data that we want to retrieve. So let's say that if I wanted the first piece of data, then I would say guest list square brackets 0. And this, if I console log it, you can see is Angela, which we can confirm is the first piece of data inside our array. Now, another cool thing that you can do with arrays is that you can use the function includes to find out if an array includes a particular item. So for example, in this case, if I say eggs.includes this specific egg, then the computer will look through your array and see if it matches with any of the items inside the array. And if it does, then this line of code will return true. And if it doesn't, then it will return false. So we get a Boolean as the output of this function. So given what you've just learned, can you write some code that creates a prompt that asks the guest what is their name, which they will then type into the prompt? Then you will check their name against all of the names inside our guest list. And if it does exist, then we'll send them an alert saying welcome. And if it doesn't exist, we'll tell them, sorry, maybe next time. So I'll go through the solution with you shortly after, but pause the video now and try and give that a go. You might need to rewind the video back and review some of the concepts that we spoke about in this lesson. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a variable called guest name. And this will be set to equal the response that we get back from the user when we ask them, what is your name? And now we can check to see if the guest list includes the guest name by using that includes function that we spoke about earlier on. And this will return either true or false, depending on whether if the guest name is included inside the guest list. So let's run our code and see what we get. So I'll give it a name that I know is definitely on the guest list, so my own, and I'm going to hit OK. Now that name is going to be stored inside guest name, and our next line of code on line 6 is going to check inside the guest list, is there a piece of data that is equal to the guest name? And we get back true. So in fact, the guest list does include the guest name. But say if we put in some random name or some random characters, then we get false once this line of code is evaluated. So how can we use this to give the user a different alert based on this condition? Yep, you guessed it, we have to use conditionals. So if we use this as the condition, then we can create an if statement that sends an alert which tells the user welcome. And if the condition was false, then we'd give them an alert that says, sorry, maybe next time. So now if we run our code, we can see if I give it a name that it recognizes, it'll give me an alert saying welcome. And if I give it a name that it doesn't recognize, then it'll say, sorry, maybe next time. So that's pretty simple, right? So this is how you can store a collection of data inside an array. And it gives you a lot of functionality without having to write a lot of code. Now, in the next lesson, we're going to explore how you can use arrays on a more intermediate level. But before I leave, here's a question. Why did the programmer quit his job? Because he didn't get a raise. I'd just like to say at this point that in this course, all the jokes that you think are funny, I will take credit for. And all the other jokes, it's down to the internet. So I'll see you on the next lesson.